I stood in our marble-tiled foyer, watching Travis sign away our dream house to his girlfriend for $1, his Mont Blanc pen moving confidently across the closing papers. He thought I was there to beg, to scream, to fall apart, but I wasn't. I was there to witness the moment he sealed his own financial destruction with a signature he'd soon desperately wish he could erase. The late afternoon sun streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the custom Brazilian cherry hardwood floors I had spent months selecting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Travis looked up from the papers, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth when he caught my eye. Beside him, Pippa, all 26 years and silicone perfection of her, toyed. With her platinum hair, unable to contain her triumphant smile. "You didn't have to come, Emma," Travis said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone he'd perfected over our 15 years of marriage. "The movers will be here tomorrow. You could have spared yourself. This." He gestured vaguely between us, as if our marriage dissolving was simply an uncomfortable social situation rather than the calculated betrayal it actually was. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, allowing myself the ghost of a smile. And miss this moment? Not a chance. Confusion flickered across his face. Travis was used to me fighting, arguing, trying to salvage what we'd built. My calm demeanor clearly unsettled him, though he tried not to show it. Good. Let him wonder. "Just sign the last page," he announced, sliding the document toward the notary who sat uncomfortably at our kitchen island. "It's official. The house is Pippa's now." "Legally hers," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Because you put it in her name, and now she owns it." "That's generally how property transfers work, yes," Travis replied with exaggerated patience. "I'm a real estate attorney, remember? I know what I'm doing." That's when I allowed myself a genuine smile, because Travis had spent 20 years building his reputation as one of the city's most ruthless property lawyers. He'd made his fortune finding loopholes, exploiting technicalities, and turning fine print into weapons for his wealthy clients, and yet, in his arrogance, in his rush to punish me by giving our $3.7 million lakefront home to his girlfriend, he'd overlooked something critical. "Congratulations, Pippa," I said, my voice steady and light. "I hope you enjoy the place." Pippa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together, her confidence wavering at my composure. She'd expected tears, rage, a scene worthy of reality television. Instead, she was getting calm acceptance that clearly made her uneasy. "We will," she stammered, glancing at Travis for support. The notary, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes, stamped the document and quickly gathered her things. She'd witnessed enough ugly divorces to recognize a time bomb when she saw one. "I'll file these with the county recorder's office first thing Monday," she murmured, eager to escape the tension filling our once-happy home. "Perfect," Travis said, walking her to the door. "The sooner the better." When he returned, Pippa was already wandering through the great room, running her fingers over the custom bookshelves, mentally redecorating. "I'm thinking we should replace these with something more modern," she called over her shoulder. "And that awful painting you always loved has got to go." The awful painting was an original piece from a local artist I'd discovered at a small gallery 10 years ago. I'd fallen in love with its stormy lakeside scene, so similar to the view from our back terrace. Travis had complained about its price then, but I'd insisted it was an investment. I'd been right. The artist had since gained international recognition, and the painting was now worth nearly 6 times what we'd paid. "You should probably keep it," I suggested mildly. "It's worth about $120,000 now." Pippa's hand dropped from the frame. "Oh." Travis shot me a suspicious look. "Why are you being so helpful?" I shrugged. "Just because our marriage is over doesn't mean I have to be petty." He narrowed his eyes, not buying it for a second. Travis knew me too well. Knew that I didn't surrender, didn't accept defeat, didn't walk away from what was mine. We'd built this house together, designed every room, selected every finish. This was our dream, our future. The place where we'd planned to grow old together before Pippa had slithered into his office as a legal assistant and somehow convinced him that, at 48, he deserved someone younger, someone who understood him better. "What are you planning, Emma?" he asked bluntly. I pushed away from the doorframe and picked up my purse from the console table, the antique French piece I'd found at an estate sale, and restored myself. "Nothing," I answered truthfully. "I don't need to plan anything." And that was the beauty of it. I didn't need schemes or plots. Travis had already done all the work himself. "I should go," I said. "I'm sure you two have celebrating to do." "Emma," Travis called as I reached the front door. I paused, hand on, the knob. "I know this is hard, but it's for the best. I'll make sure you're taken care of in the divorce settlement." The statement was so patronizing, so perfectly Travis, that I couldn't help but laugh. "That's very generous of you," I replied, not bothering to hide my amusement. Pippa stepped closer to Travis, linking her arm with his possessively. "We're going to be very happy here," she said, her voice carrying a defensive edge. "I'm sure you think so," I agreed. As I opened the door, I couldn't resist adding, "By the way, Travis, you might want to check with Morton County about that special assessment district established last year. Just a friendly suggestion." The flash of uncertainty in his eyes was worth every moment of heartbreak I'd endured over the past 6 months. Travis prided himself on knowing every real estate law, every tax code, every property regulation in the state. The fact that I, the art history professor he'd always subtly dismissed as impractical and unworldly, might know something about our property that he didn't was clearly impossible in his mind. And yet, as I walked to my car under the canopy of mature maples that lined our circular driveway, I could feel his eyes boring into my back, the first seeds of doubt taking root. I didn't look back as I drove away from the home we'd built together. I didn't need to. In exactly 3 days, Travis would discover what I'd known for weeks, that his perfect plan to punish me would become the instrument of his own undoing, and I would be ready when that happened. I drove exactly 3 miles from Pippa's, lakefront property before pulling into the scenic overlook that gave visitors a postcard-perfect view of Lake Windermere. My hands were steady as I parked, but the moment I cut the engine, the trembling began. "Not here," I whispered to myself, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. "Not now." 6 months of careful planning, of compartmentalizing, my rage and heartbreak, of moving chess pieces into position. I wouldn't unravel now, not when I was so close to checkmate. I took 10 deep breaths, just as Natalia, my therapist, had taught me. "Acknowledge the emotion, but don't become the emotion," her voice echoed in my head. Good advice from a woman who'd survived her own spectacularly devastating divorce 5 years ago, and now helped others navigate their own. When my breathing steadied, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Naomi, my sister and confidant. "It's done. He signed the transfer." 3 dots appeared immediately. Naomi, always quick to respond, "How are you holding up?" How was I holding up? That was the question, wasn't it? 6 months ago, my life had shattered when I discovered Travis's affair with his 26-year-old assistant. Not from catching them together, or finding a stray earring, or any of the cliché ways betrayals are uncovered in movies. No, I found out because Travis sat me down at our kitchen island, the same one where he'd just signed away our house, and told me with clinical detachment that he deserved happiness and had found someone who understands the demands of his career. As if I hadn't spent 15 years supporting that career. As if I hadn't moved 3 times for his job opportunities, postponed my own doctorate, planned my teaching schedule around his court appearances, and hosted countless dinner parties for clients he needed to impress. I'm fine, I typed back to Naomi. Better than fine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I wasn't lying. Despite the trembling hands and the knot in my stomach, I was better than fine. Because while Travis thought he was punishing me, he had no idea what was coming. My phone rang. Naomi. Of course, not satisfied with my brief text. "Don't you I'm fine me," she said when I answered. "I've been listening to you strategize for months. Talk to me." I sighed, gazing out at the sparkling blue water. He was so smug, Naomi. You should have seen his face sitting there with perfect little Pippa, signing away our house like it was nothing. Did he suspect anything? He looked uncertain when I mentioned the special assessment district, but he's too arrogant to think I'd know something about real estate that he doesn't. Naomi laughed, a sharp sound lacking any real humor. Travis always did underestimate you. Remember when he told you that art history was a hobby degree? I did remember. It was the same conversation where he'd suggested I focus on supporting his career rather than pursuing my doctorate. I'd acquiesced then, putting my ambitions on hold. One of many compromises I'd made over the years. When do you think he'll find out? Naomi asked. The county assessor's office will process the transfer on Monday. The notification should arrive by Wednesday, Thursday at the latest. And he has no idea? Even though he's a real estate attorney? I smiled despite myself. That's the beautiful irony. Travis specializes in commercial real estate. He handles office buildings, shopping centers, development deals. Residential regulations aren't his focus, especially not the local ordinances that only apply to our lakefront district. But still, he didn't research this before transferring a multi-million-dollar property? Travis doesn't think he needs to research things he believes he already knows, I replied. And he certainly wouldn't think he needed to consult his art history professor wife on matters of real estate law. After hanging up with Naomi, I pulled back onto the road and headed toward the small lakeside cottage I'd been renting for the past 3 months. Travis didn't know about this place either. He assumed I was staying with Naomi, which was what I'd initially told him when he asked me to move out, to give us both space to think. I'd found the cottage through a former student who managed vacation properties around the lake. It was modest, just 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a screened porch. But it had a charm that our grand showpiece of a house had always lacked. Here, surrounded by mismatched furniture and vintage quilts, I'd found unexpected peace while planning my response to Travis's betrayal. As I unlocked the cottage door, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I frowned, opening the message. It's Pippa. How did you get my number? I replied, genuinely curious. I'd deliberately avoided any contact with her. Travis's phone, came the quick response. What did you mean about a special assessment district? I smiled. Less than an hour and curiosity, or more likely anxiety, had already gotten the better of her. Travis must have dismissed my parting comment, but Pippa wasn't as confident. I considered my response carefully. Too much information would alert Travis, but a vague answer would keep her worried. Just something that affects lakefront properties, in certain areas. I'm sure Travis looked into it before the transfer. If not, it might be worth checking. I sent the text, then silenced my phone and placed it face down on the kitchen counter. Let her stew over that. Opening the refrigerator, I pulled out the bottle of champagne I'd been saving for this exact moment. Not to celebrate the end of my marriage, that deserved mourning, not celebration, but to mark the beginning of reclaiming my power. I poured a single glass and carried it out to the porch swing that faced the lake. From here, I could just make out the roof of our house, Pippa's house, on the distant shoreline. The sprawling cedar and glass structure stood out among the more traditional homes, just as Travis had intended when he insisted on hiring a modernist architect, despite my preference for something that blended better with the natural surroundings. Sipping my champagne, I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge all that I'd lost. 15 years of marriage, the future I'd planned, the security I'd thought we'd built together. Travis hadn't just betrayed me with Pippa. He'd betrayed every promise, every shared dream, every moment we'd spent planning our life together. But as I watched the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and pink, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Because in his determination to hurt me, Travis had made a critical mistake. And that mistake would cost him far more than he could imagine. The best revenge, I was discovering, wasn't crafting elaborate punishments. It was simply allowing someone to face the natural consequences of their own actions. And Travis's consequences were just beginning. 2 months earlier, I had been sitting in my office at Windermere College, struggling to focus on grading final papers from my Renaissance art seminar. My mind kept drifting to the impending divorce, to Travis's increasingly aggressive demands that I be reasonable about the house. A knock on my open door startled me. I looked up to find Billy Reynolds, the head of the college's maintenance department, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Billy was a fixture on campus, a middle-aged man with perpetually ink-stained hands who knew every inch of the college's historic buildings better than anyone. "Sorry to bother you, Professor Harlow," he said, twisting his baseball cap in his hands. "But I heard about what's happening with your place on the lake, and I thought—" He hesitated. "Well, I thought there's something you should know." I gestured. For him to come in, curiosity piqued. Billy and I had always been friendly. I'd helped his daughter with her college applications last year, but we weren't close enough for him to involve himself in my personal affairs. "What is it, Billy?" He sat on the edge of the chair across from my desk. "My brother-in-law works for the county assessor's office," he began, "and there's been some changes to the waterfront properties in your area. Something called a special waterfront infrastructure assessment." I frowned. "I haven't heard anything about this." "It just passed 3 months ago," Billy explained. "Affects all the luxury properties on the North Shore. They're upgrading the water treatment facility, putting in that new marina, fixing the flood control systems. All those mega houses are getting hit with a special tax assessment." My heart began to beat faster. "How much are we talking about?" Billy winced. "For a place like yours? Properties valued over $3 million get the highest rate. My brother-in-law says it's about $840,000, spread over 10 years if you want, but—" He hesitated again. "But what?" "But if there's a property transfer for below market value, the entire assessment becomes due immediately from the original owner." I sat back, the implications spinning through my mind. "The original owner, meaning Travis and me?" Billy nodded. "The county put it in to prevent people from avoiding the assessment by doing quickie transfers to family members or shell companies. Guess they had trouble with that in the past." "And this applies to all transfers? Even divorce settlements?" "Any transfer for substantially below market value," Billy confirmed. "My brother-in-law says they're especially watching $1 transfers. Those trigger automatic review." My mind flashed to Travis's latest settlement offer, delivered through his lawyer just 2 days ago. I would sign away all rights to the house, and he would give me a slightly larger portion of our investment portfolio. When I'd balked, his attorney had hinted that if I didn't agree, Travis might transfer the property to someone else entirely. It had been a threat, and I suddenly realized it was a threat Travis fully intended to carry out. "Billy," I said carefully, "this is extremely valuable information. Would your brother-in-law be willing to talk to me, officially?" He shook his head. "He's already risking his job telling me about it. But the assessment notices haven't gone out yet. They're scheduled for the end of the month. Everything's public record, though. You just need to know where to look." After Billy left, I sat motionless at my desk, thoughts racing. If Travis transferred the house to Pippa for a nominal amount, as he'd threatened, the entire assessment would fall on us as the original owners. Given that Travis had already moved most of our liquid assets to accounts I couldn't access, I had little doubt about who would be left holding the bill. He was setting me up for financial ruin. The betrayal cut deeper than the affair, deeper even, than the casual cruelty with which he'd ended our marriage. This was calculated destruction, an attempt to ensure I would never recover. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called Naomi. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "And I need a good property attorney, not someone in Travis's circle." That evening, I sat across from Ravi Mehta in his modest downtown office. Unlike Travis's sleek corporate firm with its harbor views and original artwork, Ravi's practice focused on representing homeowners against banks, insurance companies, and yes, tax authorities. "So you haven't received any formal notification about this assessment yet?" Ravi asked, reviewing the information I'd gathered from the county's website. "No, but I confirmed it exists. The notices are scheduled to go out at the end of the month." Ravi nodded, scrolling through the county ordinance on his computer. "And you believe your husband intends to transfer the property before then, potentially, to his—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic term. "To his girlfriend," I finished for him. "For a nominal amount, yes. His lawyer hinted as much." Ravi leaned back in his chair, studying me. "And you're not planning to contest the transfer itself?" I hesitated. I could fight it, certainly. But Travis was a formidable opponent with virtually unlimited resources for legal battles. I'd seen how he operated in professional contexts, relentless, calculating, willing to drain the other side financially until they gave up. "I'm considering a different approach," I said carefully. Understanding dawned in Ravi's eyes. "You're thinking of letting him transfer the property without warning him about the assessment." I didn't answer directly. "What would happen, hypothetically, if he does transfer the property and then the assessment notice arrives?" Ravi turned back to his computer, pulling up the relevant section of the ordinance. According to this, if a qualifying property is transferred for less than 75% of market value within 6 months before or after the assessment is levied, the original owners remain liable for the full amount, due immediately. And there's no way around that? No appeals process? "There's always appeals," Ravi said with a small smile. "But this ordinance was specifically designed to prevent avoidance. The county was tired of losing infrastructure funding through property transfer loopholes. Which means Travis, as a commercial real estate attorney, should know better," I observed. "One would think so," Ravi agreed. "But residential tax law isn't his specialty, and these special assessment districts are fairly new. Plus what? Plus, people tend to get sloppy when they're acting out of emotion rather than logic." Ravi closed his laptop. "Mrs. Harlow?" "Emma. Please, Emma, I need to be clear about something. I can advise you on your legal rights and obligations regarding this assessment. But if you're asking me to help you set up your husband to be blindsided by a major tax liability—" "I'm not asking that," I interrupted. "I'm simply trying to understand what happens if I do nothing." Ravi studied me for a long moment. "If you do nothing, and your husband transfers the property as you suspect he might, then yes, he would be liable for the assessment. But I should warn you that he could potentially come after you for failure to disclose a known liability." I nodded, considering this. "But if I genuinely didn't know about the assessment when the transfer occurred, if the county hadn't sent the notices yet, then I would have had nothing to disclose." "Technically, that's correct." I stood, extending my hand. "Thank you, Ravi. You've been very helpful." As I turned to leave, Ravi called after me. "Emma, if your husband does transfer the property, and if he does get hit with this assessment, come back and see me. You might need representation when he realizes what's happened." I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." Walking to my car, I felt a strange calm settling over me. For months, I had been at Travis's mercy, reacting to his decisions, scrambling to protect myself from his latest maneuver. But now, for the first time since he'd announced he was leaving, I held a piece of information he didn't have. Now I had power. Not to hurt him, not to extract revenge, but to simply let him experience the natural consequences of his own actions. All I had to do was nothing. The morning after my meeting with Ravi, I woke with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The path forward wasn't about fighting Travis or trying to save a marriage he'd already destroyed. It was about allowing him the freedom to make his own mistakes while protecting myself from the fallout. I spent the day meticulously combing through our financial records, something I should have done years ago. Travis had always handled our money, insisting it made sense given his expertise. I'd trusted him, focusing instead on my academic career and our social obligations. Now I recognized that dependence for what it was, another means of control. Our finances were more complex than I'd realized. Joint accounts, individual accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, life insurance policies. Travis had created a labyrinth that would take months to fully untangle. But I didn't have months. If he was planning to transfer the house to Pippa, I needed to protect whatever assets I could access immediately. I called Naomi, who had a background in finance before she'd switched to interior design. I need your help going through these statements, I told her. There's too much and I don't know what I'm looking for. 2 hours later, we sat at her dining room table, papers spread out around us. He's been moving money, Naomi said, pointing to a series of transfers from our joint investment account to one in his name only. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger immediate suspicion but consistent, starting about 8 months ago. 8 months. 2 months before he told me about Pippa. The betrayal had been even longer in the making than I'd thought. The good news, Naomi continued, is that he didn't get everything. Your inheritance from Grandma Josephine, the one you received 3 years ago, it's still sitting in that separate account. She tapped a statement from Morton Savings and Trust. About $175,000. He couldn't touch that, I said. It was specifically left to me, never commingled with our marital assets. Smart of Grandma Jo to set it up that way. Naomi picked up another document. And your retirement account from the college is solely in your name. Not huge, but it's something. I nodded, gratitude washing over me for my grandmother's foresight and my own small act of independence in maintaining my faculty retirement account. What about the vacation property in Colorado? I asked. We'd purchased a small cabin near Telluride 7 years ago, mainly using it for ski trips and occasionally lending it to friends. Naomi rifled through the property documents. Jointly owned, but, she frowned, reading more carefully. There's a mortgage on it. When did you refinance? We didn't, I said, taking the paper from her. Sure enough, there was a $320,000 mortgage recorded 6 months ago, with only Travis's signature on the documents. He mortgaged it without telling you? Can he do that? Apparently he did, I said. Grimly. And used my signature somewhere along the way. The depth of his deception was still unfolding, each discovery like another knife to the heart. Naomi's expression hardened. Emma, this is fraud. You could report him. I shook my head. And spend years in court? Against a man who knows every judge in 3 counties? I set the paper aside. No. Let's focus on what I can protect right now. By evening, we had a clearer picture. Travis had systematically moved and leveraged what he could, but he hadn't been able to touch my inheritance or retirement funds. I had enough to survive, to restart, but nothing close to the lifestyle we'd built together over 15 years. Unless, of course, the special assessment came into play. The next morning, I met again with Ravi, armed with new questions and a deeper understanding of my situation. If Travis does transfer the property and gets hit with the assessment, I asked, what happens if he can't pay it? Ravi leaned forward. The county would place a lien on the property. If the assessment remains unpaid after a specific period, usually 6 months, they can initiate foreclosure proceedings. And then what? The property would be sold at auction to satisfy the debt. Any surplus would go to the current owner. I considered this. Pippa, in this scenario, correct. But if Travis transferred it to her for $1, he could argue he retained some financial interest, couldn't he? Try to claim part of any surplus? Ravi smiled slightly. He could try, but ironically, the more he tried to establish financial interest in the property after the fact, the stronger the case would be that the transfer was fraudulent to begin with. A catch-22, I murmured. Precisely. If he admits the dollar transfer was just a legal fiction and he still has a financial stake, then he'd be admitting to attempting to avoid the assessment through a sham transfer, which is exactly what the ordinance was designed to prevent. I sat back processing this. And what about me? Could I be held liable for any part of the assessment? Ravi consulted his notes. The house is currently in both your names, correct? Yes, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Then technically, you could be jointly liable. However, he added, seeing my expression, if you're no longer an owner when the assessment notice arrives, your liability becomes more complicated, especially if you can establish that you weren't aware of the assessment before the transfer. And if I want to make absolutely sure I'm protected, Ravi thought for a moment, you could file a quitclaim deed, relinquishing any interest in the property before the transfer to Pippa. That would create a clear record that you were no longer an owner when the assessment was levied. Would Travis need to know about this quitclaim deed? Not necessarily. It's a unilateral action. You'd be giving up any claim to the property without receiving anything in return. I nodded slowly. This made sense. I would remove myself from the equation entirely, leaving Travis and Pippa to handle whatever came next. There's something else you should consider, Ravi said, his tone careful. If Travis transferred the property to avoid the assessment, and if the county determined it was done with that intent, they could potentially pursue fraudulent transfer claims. Against Travis? Against Travis, potentially against Pippa, and possibly against you if you were aware of the assessment before the transfer. I considered this, but if I filed a quitclaim deed before any of that happened, it would strengthen your position that you weren't involved in any attempt to avoid the assessment, Ravi finished. You were simply removing yourself from a property you no longer wanted to own. I smiled. Which is entirely true. I don't want that house anymore, not with all the memories it now contains. As I left Ravi's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Travis. Dropping papers by your office tomorrow. Need your signature to resolve the house situation. Don't make this difficult. I stared at the message, a plan crystallizing in my mind. Travis wanted my signature? Fine. He would get it, but not on the documents he expected. First thing the next morning, I returned to Ravi's office and signed a quitclaim deed, relinquishing all my rights to the lakefront property. Ravi promised to file it immediately. Remember, he cautioned as his assistant notarized the document. This means you're giving up any claim to the property. If its value increases, if there's any future profit from its sale, none of that will be yours. I understand, I said. And I did. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about freedom, from Travis, from his manipulation, from the web of deceit he'd woven around our life together. I was cutting myself loose, and in doing so, I was ensuring that whatever trap Travis had set would catch only him when it finally sprung. That evening, as I packed away the wedding album I'd finally forced myself to retrieve from our bedroom closet, memories flooded back unbidden. Travis and I on our honeymoon in Greece, his arm around my waist as we posed before the Aegean. The housewarming party for our first tiny apartment, where we'd served cheap wine in plastic cups and danced in the empty living room before the furniture arrived. The day we'd found the lakefront lot, standing hand in hand as Travis described, the home we would build there. The home where we would raise our children. Children who never came, despite years of trying. I closed the album, sliding it into a storage box. Our inability to conceive had changed us. changed Travis. With each negative test, each failed treatment, I'd watched him withdraw a little more. The warmth that had drawn me to him in law school, the easy laughter we'd once shared, slowly hardening into ambition and drive that excluded everything else, including me. When had we stopped being partners and become merely occupants of the same beautiful house? Was it when he made partner at his firm 5 years ago? When I turned down the department chair position at the college to support his career? Or was it the day the fertility specialist suggested donor eggs, and Travis had said, with cold finality, "I'm not raising someone else's child?" My phone buzzed. A text from Natalia. "Just checking in. How are you doing with the packing?" I glanced around the cottage, at the scattered boxes containing the pieces of my life I'd managed to retrieve from our house during Travis's frequent business trips. Books, clothes, my grandmother's china, the small artifacts I'd collected during research trips abroad. So little to show for 15 years of marriage. "Almost done," I replied. "Just finished with the wedding album." 3 dots appeared, then, "That's a big step. Do you want company tonight?" I considered it. Natalia had been a godsend these past months. First as my therapist, then, once I'd started seeing someone else for counseling, as a friend who truly understood what I was going through. "Thanks, but I think I need to be alone with this tonight." "Understood. Call if you change your mind. And remember what we talked about. Feeling the grief doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." I set the phone down, her words echoing in my mind. I had loved Travis, truly, deeply loved him. His betrayal hadn't erased that fact, however much I wished it could. The grief of losing not just my husband but the future we'd planned was real, and I was finally learning to acknowledge it rather than push it away. Picking up my laptop, I opened the folder where I'd stored images from our house's construction. There we were at the groundbreaking, Travis in a hard hat, looking impossibly young and excited. Me beside him, laughing as he scooped up ceremonial dirt with a silver shovel his firm had given us as a gift. I clicked through more photos, the foundation being poured, the framing going up, the 2 of us standing in what would become our bedroom, nothing but wooden studs surrounding us as we gazed out at the lake. So much hope in those images, so many dreams. Travis had thrown himself into the project with characteristic intensity, meeting with the architect weekly, obsessing over every detail from the imported marble to the custom lighting fixtures. The house had been his vision, his statement to the world that he had arrived. At the time, I'd been swept along by his enthusiasm, but looking back, I could see how the house had become a substitute for what we couldn't have, a family. Each upgrade, each luxury feature, filling the spaces that should have held children's laughter. I closed the laptop, unable to look at any more reminders of what we'd lost. Not just recently, but years ago, when our marriage began its slow, almost imperceptible decline. Professor Harlow. I looked up from my desk to find Sal Garcia, one of my graduate students, hovering in the doorway the next morning. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "I just wanted to drop off my revised thesis proposal." "Come in, Sal." I gestured to the chair across, from me, grateful for the distraction from my thoughts. "How's it coming along?" "Much better after your feedback." He handed me a bound document. "I've refocused on the economic influences on Renaissance patronage rather than trying to cover everything." "Good. Narrowing your scope will strengthen your argument." I set the proposal on my to-read pile. "Was there something else? You look like you have a question." Sal hesitated. "It's just, I heard from Professor Matthews that you're going through some personal difficulties. And I wanted to say that if you need to push back our meetings or extend any deadlines, I completely understand." I kept my expression neutral, though internally I winced. News traveled fast in academic circles. "That's thoughtful of you, Sal, but not necessary. My personal life won't affect our work together." He nodded, looking relieved. I appreciate that. And, if you don't mind me saying so, Professor Harlow, you're handling everything with incredible grace. A lot of students have noticed, and we admire you for it. The unexpected comment caught me off guard. I had been so focused on maintaining my professional facade that I hadn't considered how my students might perceive my situation. Travis's affair with Pippa wasn't exactly a secret. They'd been seen together around town long before he officially ended our marriage. "Thank you, Sal," I said finally. "That means more than you know." After he left, I sat contemplating his words. Grace. Was that what this was? It didn't feel like grace from the inside. It felt like survival, like putting one foot in front of the other because the alternative was unthinkable. But maybe that was grace after all, continuing to live with dignity when dignity was the last thing you felt. My office phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. I checked the caller ID, Travis's law firm. Taking a deep breath, I answered. Emma Harlow. "Dr. Harlow, this is Mary Ann from Caldwell Winters and Associates. Mr. Harlow asked me to confirm that you'll be available at 3 p.m. to sign the property transfer documents." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Actually, Mary Ann, I won't be available. I have a department meeting that cannot be rescheduled." A small lie, but a necessary one. However, Mr. Harlow should know that I've already filed a quitclaim deed regarding the property in question. A pause. I'm not familiar with that document. Let me just check with Mr. Harlow." "No need," I interrupted smoothly. "He's an attorney. He'll understand the implications. Please tell him the deed has been filed with the county recorder's office, and he's welcome to proceed with whatever plans he has for the property without my signature or involvement." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll pass that along, Dr. Harlow." "Thank you, Mary Ann. Have a nice day." I hung up, heart racing despite my calm exterior. The first shot had been fired. Now it was only a matter of time before Travis realized what I'd done and what I knew. Travis called exactly 17 minutes after I hung up with his assistant. I let it ring 3 times, using those seconds to steady my breathing and compose myself before answering with a casual, "Hello, Travis." "What the hell is this about a quitclaim deed?" he demanded, skipping any pretense of civility. I could hear the edge in his voice, that particular tone of controlled fury I'd come to recognize over the years when a case wasn't going his way. "Exactly what it sounds like," I replied calmly. "I've signed away any interest in the lakefront property. You're free to do whatever you want with it." A pause. "Why?" The suspicion in his voice was palpable. "Does it matter? I thought you'd be pleased. Isn't this what you wanted? For me to step aside?" "I wanted you to sign the transfer papers we discussed," he said, his voice tightening. "This wasn't the agreement." "We never had an agreement, Travis," I interrupted. "You made demands, and I chose a different path. The end result is the same. The house is yours to dispose of as you see fit." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him reassessing, recalculating, trying to determine if this was a trap or simply an unexpected gift. "Did your lawyer put you up to this?" he finally asked. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Travis always assumed someone else must be guiding my decisions, that I couldn't possibly have strategic thoughts of my own. "I made this decision myself," I said simply. "The house holds too many memories. I'd rather make a clean break." He didn't respond immediately, and I knew he was searching for the angle, the hidden motivation. Travis never took anything at face value, especially unexpected concessions. "Fine," he said finally. "If that's how you want to play it." "It's not a game, Travis. Just a decision that makes sense for me." He made a non-committal sound. "We still need to discuss the rest of the settlement." "Of course. Have your lawyer contact mine." I paused, then added, "I hope you and Pippa will be very happy there." The mention of Pippa's name triggered another stretch of silence. Travis had rarely spoken about her directly to me, maintaining the fiction that their relationship had only begun after our separation. "Is there anything else?" I prompted when he didn't respond. "No," he said curtly. "That's all." After hanging up, I exhaled slowly, surprised by my own composure. The old Emma would have been shaking, perhaps even crying after such a conversation. But I felt strangely calm, almost detached, as if I were observing a chess match rather than participating in it. The board was set. The pieces were moving. Now came the hardest part, waiting. For the next 3 days, I focused entirely on my work at the college. I threw myself into end-of-term grading, met with students about their summer research plans, and began outlining my fall seminar on women patrons in Renaissance art. The familiar rhythm of academic life was soothing, a reminder that parts of my identity remained untouched by Travis's betrayal. I heard nothing more from him or his lawyer. Another strategic silence, I was sure. Travis would be examining the quitclaim deed, looking for loopholes or tricks, perhaps consulting with colleagues who specialized in residential property law. He wouldn't move forward until he was convinced my action benefited him without hidden costs. On Thursday evening, as I was walking back to my car after a faculty meeting, my phone rang. Not Travis this time, but Naomi. "You're not going to believe." "Who I just saw at Riverview Bistro," she said without preamble. "Who?" "Travis and Pippa, having dinner with the Caldwells." Catherine and Richard Caldwell were founding partners at Travis's firm, and our longtime friends, or so I'd thought. "They took her to Riverview?" I asked, a small knot forming in my stomach despite my best efforts. Riverview had been our special occasion restaurant, the place we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays throughout our marriage. "They were all laughing like old friends," Naomi continued, her voice tight with indignation. "Catherine was showing Pippa her new bracelet, like they were girlfriends at a spa day." I unlocked my car, sliding into the driver's seat. "I'm not surprised. The Caldwells will back whoever's winning. They've always been opportunists." "It's disgusting. They've known you for what, 12 years? 13, I corrected. "Since Travis joined the firm." Naomi made a disgusted sound. "Well, Catherine can enjoy her new shopping buddy. I give it 6 months before Pippa gets bored playing corporate wife to a man old enough to be her father." Despite everything, I found myself defending Travis. "He's 48, Naomi, not 70. Still, what does a 26-year-old have in common with him beyond his credit cards?" I didn't answer. The truth was, I'd asked myself the same question countless times in the dark hours of sleepless nights. What did Pippa see in Travis? What did he see in her, beyond the obvious youth and beauty? Had he truly fallen in love? Or was this simply a predictable midlife crisis, a desperate attempt to reclaim his youth after the disappointment of our childless marriage? "Anyway," Naomi continued, "I thought you should know they're out celebrating. Probably the house transfer." "Probably," I agreed, starting my car. "It doesn't matter, Naomi, let them celebrate." "How can you be so calm about this? It's like you don't even care anymore." I pulled out of the parking lot, phone on speaker as I drove. "I care," I said quietly. "But not about Travis taking Pippa to our restaurant, or the Caldwells choosing. Sides, those things can't hurt me unless I let them." After hanging up with Naomi, I drove not to my lakeside cottage but to the small park overlooking the town. Parking at the scenic viewpoint, I got out and walked to the railing, gazing down at the twinkling lights of Windermere below. Somewhere down there, Travis and Pippa were raising glasses, perhaps toasting their new home, their future together. The thought should have been painful, but instead I felt a strange sense of release. Each step Travis took with Pippa, each dinner, each celebration, each night in our house, was a step further into the trap he had unknowingly set for himself. The assessment notices would be sent out next week, according to Billy's brother-in-law. By now, Travis had almost certainly completed the property transfer to Pippa, confident in his victory over me. All I had to do was wait. I drove back to my cottage, made a cup of chamomile tea, and curled up on the screened porch with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. For the first time since Travis had announced he was leaving, I felt at peace with myself and my choices. The old Emma would have been frantic, obsessing over Travis and Pippa's dinner, imagining their conversations, torturing herself with images of them in our home. The new Emma, the woman I was becoming through this crucible of betrayal and rebirth, could sit quietly with a book, knowing that justice didn't require her constant attention or effort. Justice, I was learning, sometimes arrived on its own schedule. All it needed was the space to unfold. The next morning, I woke to a text from Ravi. County assessor confirmed notices going out Monday. Call me if you need anything. I texted back a simple thank you and got ready for my day, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. The countdown had begun. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day on Lake Windermere. I stood on the small dock behind my cottage, coffee in hand, watching a pair of loons glide across the water. The morning was so peaceful that it was almost possible to forget what day it was, almost possible to forget that somewhere in the county offices, assessment notices were being printed, sorted, and prepared for delivery, including one for a certain lakefront property that now legally belonged to Pippa. I'd slept surprisingly well the night before, waking without the knot of anxiety that had been my constant companion for months. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. The wheels were in motion, the dominoes lined up, waiting for that first gentle push that would set everything tumbling. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Natalia. Coffee at Lakeside Brew? I have an hour before my first client. I texted, back a quick be there in 20 and went inside to get ready. The small routine of meeting a friend for coffee felt reassuringly normal, a reminder that life continued beyond the dissolution of my marriage. Lakeside Brew was busy with the Monday morning crowd, local business people grabbing caffeine before work, college students cramming for finals, tourists already exploring the town despite the early hour. Natalia had secured a table by the window with a view of the harbor, 2 steaming mugs already waiting. I ordered your usual, she said, as I sat down. You look good, Emma. Rested. I feel good, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. Better than I have in a long time. The power of letting go, Natalia observed with a knowing smile. As both a therapist and a divorcee, she understood the liberation that came with acceptance. How's the new place? Small, but perfect for now. The dock is definitely the best feature. I've been sitting out there in the evenings watching the sunset. That sounds lovely. She took a sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim. And how are you feeling about everything else? I knew what she was asking. How was I handling the house transfer, Travis and Pippa's relationship, the impending assessment notice? I'm at peace with it, I said honestly. Whatever happens next, I know I've done what's right for me. Natalia nodded approvingly. That's exactly where you need to be. Not focused on revenge, not wallowing in victimhood, just centered in your own truth. I smiled, grateful for her understanding. Natalia had been instrumental in helping me process my grief and anger without being consumed by it. Her guidance had kept me from making decisions based purely on emotion, decisions I might have later regretted. We chatted about her upcoming vacation plans and my ideas for fall courses, the conversation comfortably avoiding the topic of Travis, until Natalia suddenly stiffened, her gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. Don't turn around, she murmured. But your ex just walked in with his friend. A chill ran through me despite the warm coffee between my palms. I hadn't seen Travis and Pippa together since that day in our house, in their house, when he'd signed the transfer papers. Are they coming this way? I asked quietly. No, they're waiting at the counter. Natalia's eyes tracked their movements. They haven't seen us yet. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of how far I'd come. It's fine if they do. We're bound to run into each other in a town this size. Natalia reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You don't have to be that evolved, you know. It's okay to not want to see them together. I appreciate that, I said with a small smile. But truly, I'm okay. And I realized with some surprise. The thought of seeing Travis with Pippa no longer twisted my stomach into knots. They were just two people getting coffee. Two people whose choices would soon have consequences they hadn't anticipated. They're leaving, Natalia reported. To-go order, apparently. Crisis averted. I turned slightly, catching a glimpse of Travis's back as he held the door for Pippa. Even from behind, the set of his shoulders looked tense, his movements stiff. Interesting. He looked stressed, I observed. Wouldn't you be with a girlfriend half your age to keep up with? Natalia joked. I smiled, but the observation lingered. Travis had always carried tension in his shoulders when a case wasn't going well or when he was worried about something. It was a tell I'd learned to recognize over our years together. What was worrying him now? I got my answer 3 hours later, during my office hours at the college. My phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. A local area code, but not one I recognized. Normally I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Harlow speaking. Emma, it's Marianne. From Travis's office? Her voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial. I sat up straighter, surprised. Travis's assistant had always been cordial but professional in our interactions, never calling me directly, and certainly never using my first name. Marianne? Hello? What can I do for you? I probably shouldn't be calling you, she said, still whispering. But I thought you should know. There's something going on with Travis. He received some kind of notice this morning and has been locked in his office ever since. He canceled all his appointments and has been making calls nonstop. My pulse quickened. It had happened. The assessment notice had arrived. That's concerning, I said neutrally. But why tell me? A pause. Because he's been calling everyone who might know anything about special assessment districts. I've heard him on the phone with the county assessor, 3 different real estate attorneys, even Judge Milligan, who handles property cases. He sounds desperate. I processed this information, careful to keep my tone even. I appreciate you letting me know, Marianne, but Travis's professional challenges aren't my concern anymore. There's more, she continued, her voice dropping even lower. Right before he shut his door, I heard him tell Richard Caldwell that there must be some mistake, that the property can't possibly be subject to an $840,000 tax assessment. So there it was, confirmation that the notice had arrived and that Travis was already scrambling to find a way out. My prediction had been accurate right down to the dollar amount. I see, I said simply. He mentioned your name several times, Marianne added. Asked Richard if you could have known about this somehow. I thought you should be prepared if he reaches out. An unexpected warmth spread through me at her warning. Marianne had worked with Travis for nearly a decade. Her loyalty should have been to him without question. That she would risk calling me suggested that perhaps not everyone at the firm was as enamored with Travis's behavior as he believed. Thank you, Marianne. That was thoughtful of you. I should go, she said quickly. He could come out any minute. But Emma, good luck. The line went dead. I set the phone down carefully on my desk, aware of my quickened heartbeat and the slight tremor in my hands. It was happening, exactly as I'd anticipated, but somehow still surprising in its reality. The first tremor had struck. Travis now knew about the assessment. He was searching for answers, for loopholes, for someone to blame. It wouldn't take him long to realize that the transfer to Pippa, the act he'd intended as a punishment for me, had triggered the immediate payment requirement. My phone buzzed again, a text message this time. Travis, we need to talk, immediately. Stared at the screen, a small smile forming despite myself. I could almost see him pacing the confines of his corner office, running his hand through his hair in that agitated way he had when things weren't going according to plan. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Let him sit with it a while longer. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. The game was only just beginning. I let Travis stew for exactly 4 hours before responding to his text with a simple, "I have office hours until 5. After that, I'll be at Windermere Coffee on Main." No questions about what he wanted to discuss. No indication of concern or curiosity. Just a statement of when and where I would be available, on my terms, not his. It was a small assertion of power, but significant. For months, I had rearranged my schedule to accommodate Travis's demands for meetings about the divorce, about the house, about asset division. Not today. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner where we would have privacy, but still be in a public place. I ordered a cappuccino and graded papers while I waited, determined to appear entirely unbothered when he arrived. Travis burst through the door at 5:07, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was askew, his hair showed signs of the habitual running of his fingers through it when stressed, and there was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of mounting panic. He spotted me immediately and strode over, not bothering with a greeting, before dropping into the chair across from me. "Did you know?" he demanded, voice low but intense. I set my pen down carefully and met his gaze. "You'll need to be more specific, Travis." His jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me, Emma." The assessment. "Did you know about it when you signed that quitclaim deed?" I took a deliberate sip of my cappuccino, allowing the moment to stretch before responding. "I'd like to remind you that we're in a public place. I'm happy to have a civil conversation, but I won't be spoken to with that tone." His nostrils flared, but he visibly reined himself in. "Fine, I apologize for my tone." The words were stilted, forced. "Now please answer the question." "Yes," I said simply. I knew about the special assessment district. The color drained from his face. "And you didn't tell me? You let me transfer the property knowing this would happen?" "Did I have an obligation to tell you?" I asked, genuinely curious about his logic. "You're the real estate attorney, Travis. You're the one who prides himself on finding every loophole, every advantage, every detail in property transactions." "This is different," he hissed. "This is personal," I supplied. "Yes, it is. Just like it was personal when you tried to punish me by giving our home to your girlfriend for $1. He ran his hand through his hair again, further disheveling it. "I can't believe you would do this." "I didn't do anything, Travis. I simply allowed you to make your own choices." $840,000, he muttered, almost to himself. "Due immediately." "Do you have any idea?" "I do," I interrupted calmly. "I understand exactly what that assessment means. The question is, did you? Before you transferred the house?" His silence was answer enough. "I need your help," he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him to voice. "You're still on the hook for half of this. We were joint owners when the assessment district was created." I shook my head slowly. "Actually, I'm not. I filed the quitclaim deed before you transferred. The property to Pippa. Legally, I was no longer an owner when the transfer occurred." His eyes widened slightly. "You planned this." "No, Travis. You planned this. You decided to transfer our home to your girlfriend to hurt me. I simply protected myself from the consequences of your actions." He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his expression. "Emma, be reasonable. We can reverse this. We can explain to the county that we didn't know." "We?" I raised an eyebrow. "There is no we anymore, Travis. You made that abundantly clear. For God's sake, Emma." His voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. He lowered it again with visible effort. This is nearly $1 million. I don't have that kind of liquid capital right now, and neither does Pippa. What about the house? I asked innocently. It's worth nearly $4 million. Surely you could take out a mortgage. In this market? With interest rates where they are? He shook his head. And the assessment creates a lien that would complicate any financing. I nodded thoughtfully. That is challenging. What does your attorney suggest? His jaw tightened again. My attorney suggests that I try to negotiate with you. I see. I took another sip of my cappuccino. And what exactly would we be negotiating? Travis leaned forward, his voice urgent. Help me resolve this, Emma. You must have looked into options. Before you let this happen, what do you want? Money? The vacation property? Name your price. I studied him for a long moment. This man I had loved for 15 years. This man who had discarded me without a second thought. This man who was now asking for my help only because he needed something. I don't have a price, Travis, I said. Finally. I don't want anything from you. The confusion on his face was almost comical. Then why did you do this? I didn't do anything, I repeated, gathering my papers and standing. You created this situation all by yourself, and now you get to solve it all by yourself too. I left him sitting there, staring after me with disbelief written across his face. Over the next week, I heard nothing directly from Travis, but news traveled quickly through our small lakeside community. According to Naomi, who seemed to have appointed herself my personal intelligence gatherer, Travis and Pippa had suddenly canceled their housewarming party. Their contractor abruptly stopped the kitchen renovation they'd started, leaving half installed, cabinets and a gaping hole where the imported Italian marble countertop was supposed to go. And here's the best part, Naomi said over lunch at our favorite bistro. Catherine Caldwell is telling everyone that Pippa came to her in tears, saying Travis never told her about the assessment. Apparently, she doesn't have the money to help. Pay it either. I pushed my salad around with my fork, surprisingly unmoved by these developments. The honeymoon phase ends quickly when financial disaster strikes. Naomi hummed in agreement. And it gets better. Travis has been calling everyone who might be able to help with financing. Richard Caldwell turned him down flat, said he couldn't get involved in a personal matter. She made air quotes with her fingers. Interesting how quickly they abandon him when he's no longer the golden boy. I thought of all the dinner parties Travis and I had hosted for the Caldwells over the years, all the weekends we'd spent on their yacht, all the times I'd listened to Catherine complain about her housekeeper or her landscaper or her personal trainer. The friendship had always been transactional, I realized, based on what Travis could do for the firm, not on genuine connection. What about Travis's parents? I asked. Have they gotten involved? His father was retired now, but had been a successful surgeon with significant investments. Naomi shook her head. Apparently, they're disappointed in his choices. At least that's what his mother told Margaret at the garden club meeting. That didn't surprise me. Travis's parents were traditional, conservative people who had never quite understood their son's ruthless ambition. His father had wanted him to practice law that helped people, not corporations. His decision to leave me for a much younger woman would have dismayed them. The county has already filed the lien, Naomi continued, lowering her voice. Billy's brother-in-law confirmed it. If Travis doesn't pay within 60 days, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. I nodded, setting my fork down. And knowing Travis, he's exploring every possible loophole before admitting defeat. Do you think he'll find one? I considered this. Travis was a brilliant attorney, but the assessment ordinance had been carefully crafted specifically to prevent evasion. No, I said finally. I don't think he will. 3 days later, my doorbell rang at 8:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and few people knew the location of my cottage. Looking through the peephole, I was surprised to see Pippa standing on my porch, hugging herself against the evening chill. I hesitated, then opened the door. Pippa. She looked different than the last time I'd seen her, the triumphant woman signing papers in my former home. Her designer outfit had been replaced with jeans and a simple sweater, her immaculate makeup reduced to smudged mascara and slightly reddened eyes. "I need to talk to you," she said without preamble. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing her into the cottage. She glanced around quickly, taking in the modest furnishings and the stacks of books that had followed me from the larger house. "It's cozy," she offered awkwardly. "It suits me," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "What can I do for you, Pippa?" She perched on the edge of my sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Travis never told me about the assessment. He didn't say anything about potentially owing money when he transferred the house to me." I nodded but remained silent, waiting. "He says you knew," she continued, "that you found out somehow and deliberately didn't tell him." "That's partially true," I acknowledged. "I did know. But Travis is a real estate attorney. He should have done his due diligence before transferring a multi-million-dollar property." She looked down at her hands. "He says he was distracted. That he wasn't thinking clearly because of our situation." Our situation. Such a clinical way to describe the destruction of a 15-year marriage. "Why are you here, Pippa?" I asked, directly. She raised her eyes to mine, and I was surprised to see genuine distress there. "I can't afford this assessment. Travis can't either. Not without selling the house, and we can't sell it quickly with the lien in place." She took a deep breath. "I thought maybe you and I could talk, woman to woman." "About what?" "About finding a solution that works for everyone. Travis thinks if you would agree to take back partial ownership, we could restructure the transfer, and maybe get the immediate payment requirement waived." I almost laughed at the audacity. After everything, they expected me to bail them out? To willingly put myself back on the hook for their financial disaster? "That's not going to happen," I said calmly. "The house is yours now, Pippa, both the benefits and the responsibilities that come with it." Her composure cracked slightly. "But I never asked for this. I didn't know about any assessment. She stopped, seeming to realize what she was about to admit. "You just wanted the beautiful lakefront house," I finished for her, "without having to pay market value for it." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "It wasn't like that. Travis said it would be better for everyone this way." "Better for everyone? Or better for Travis?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I'm sorry you're in this position," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Pippa was young, naive, and clearly in over her head. "But I can't help you, so that's it?" Her voice hardened slightly. "You're just going to let us lose everything?" "You're not losing anything that was rightfully yours to begin with," I pointed out. "And neither is Travis." She stood abruptly. "He was right about you. You planned this. You wanted revenge." I rose as well, keeping my voice even. "No, Pippa. I just stopped playing a game where the rules were designed to ensure I would always lose." I moved to the door, opening it. "Good night." After she left, I sat on my porch swing, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. There was no satisfaction in seeing her distress, no joy in their predicament, only a quiet certainty that justice was unfolding exactly as it should. The morning after Pippa's visit, I woke early and took my coffee to the dock. The lake was still, reflecting the pink-gold sunrise like a perfect mirror. I sat with my feet, dangling above the water, contemplating the strange journey of the past few months. I had won. That was the simple truth. Travis had tried to hurt me, to leave me with nothing, and instead had orchestrated his own downfall. The house he'd tried to take from me was now a financial albatross around his neck. His relationship with Pippa was cracking under the strain. His professional reputation was likely suffering as well, Attorneys who make catastrophic errors in their personal affairs rarely inspire confidence in clients. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. Not regretful, exactly. Travis had made his choices, and the consequences were of his own making. But the victory tasted less sweet than I'd imagined. What had I really gained? The satisfaction of watching him struggle? The knowledge that he couldn't hurt me anymore? Was that enough to build a new life on? I finished my coffee and went inside to get ready for work. As I dressed, my eyes fell on the small box of photos I'd brought from the house, images from happier, times that I hadn't been able to leave behind. I pulled out one from our 10th anniversary trip to Greece, when we'd revisited the sites from our honeymoon. We were standing on a cliff overlooking the Aegean, arms around each other, laughing. Into the camera. Had we been happy then? Truly happy? Or had the cracks already been forming, invisible in the golden Mediterranean light? I replaced the photo and closed the box, suddenly certain of what I needed to do next. Not for Travis, not even in spite of Travis, but for myself. It was time to let go completely. The following day, I sat across Naomi in her design studio. "You want to what?" Naomi stared at me, disbelief written across her face. "I want to move," I repeated calmly. "Away from Windermere. I'm thinking of applying for a position at Eastland College. Their art history department has an endowed chair, opening next fall. But Eastland is 3 hours away. Your life is here. Your friends, your colleagues." She gestured around her, as if encompassing the entire town. "You'd leave all this behind?" I smiled gently. "What's really here for me, Naomi? A small rental cottage? A job that's fine but not challenging anymore? Constant reminders of my failed marriage?" "But you're winning," she protested. "Travis is about to lose everything. Don't you want to see it happen?" I considered her question seriously. "I thought I did," I admitted. "But now I realize that staying here, watching his life unravel, it keeps me tethered to him, to the pain. I don't want that anymore." Naomi sank into her ergonomic chair, studying me. "This isn't what I expected," she finally said. "I thought you'd want to rebuild here, to show everyone you've survived, thrived even." "Maybe that's what the old Emma would have done," I acknowledged. "But I'm not her anymore." "So you're just going to walk away? Let Travis off the hook?" I shook my head. "Travis will never be off the hook. The assessment is real. The financial consequences are real. Whether I'm here to witness them or not doesn't change that." Naomi's expression softened. "I'll miss you." "You'll visit," I promised. "And I'll come back sometimes. But I need a fresh start, Naomi. Somewhere I'm not Travis Harlow's ex-wife." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You know what? I think this is the healthiest thing I've heard in this whole mess." That evening, I sat down at my small writing desk and composed an email to the department chair at Eastland College, expressing interest in their endowed position. I attached my CV, updated for the first time in years, and began drafting a cover letter that emphasized not just my academic qualifications but my vision for the future. Midway through, my phone rang. Travis again. I hesitated, then answered. Whatever he had to say, I could hear it without being pulled back into his drama. I was moving beyond him now, literally and figuratively. "Emma?" His voice sounded tired, defeated. "We need to talk about the house. I don't think there's anything left to discuss, Travis. I've talked to the county assessor," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "They're willing to work with me on a payment plan, but only if I can come up with 30% as a down payment. That's still over $250,000. I waited, sensing there was more. "I'm going to have to sell the house," he finally said. "There's no other way. But with the lien, it's complicated. The process could take months, and interest keeps accruing on the assessment." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Not because I cared about Travis's financial troubles, but because the house, our dream house, deserved better than to become a distressed property, neglected while legal issues were sorted out. "There's a buyer," Travis continued. "Someone, willing to take it as is, lien and all. They're offering fair market value minus the assessment amount." "That sounds like a reasonable solution," I observed, wondering why he was telling me this. He sighed heavily. "The buyer wants to meet with both of us before proceeding. To understand the situation fully." "Both of us? Why would they need to meet with me? I don't own the house anymore. They specifically requested it." He paused. "It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the property. Will you come?" I glanced at my half-written cover letter, the symbol of my future beyond Travis and Windermere. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell him his problems were no longer my concern. But another part, the part that was healing, growing stronger, recognized that true freedom meant I could face Travis and the house one last time without being diminished by either. "All right," I agreed. "I'll be there at 2 p.m. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened tomorrow would be the final chapter in the story of our house, and the first chapter of my new life beyond it. I arrived at the house precisely at 2 p.m., parking in the circular driveway that now featured Pippa's red convertible, alongside Travis's gleaming black sedan. A third car, a sensible blue Volvo, presumably belonged to the prospective buyer. Standing before the house brought a strange mixture of emotions. This place had been the physical manifestation of our dreams, our future. Now it was simply a beautiful structure on a perfect lakefront lot, still breathtaking, but stripped of the emotional weight I'd once attached to it. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell, a chime I had selected years ago. Travis answered almost immediately, looking haggard in a way I'd rarely seen him. The confident, commanding presence had dimmed, replaced by someone visibly carrying a heavy burden. "Emma, thank you for coming." He stepped aside, ushering me into the foyer. "They're waiting in the great room." I nodded, following him through the house. Little had changed since I'd last been there. The furniture was the same, the artwork still hung in the places I'd chosen. Only the half-completed kitchen renovation betrayed the turbulence beneath the surface. In the great room, Pippa sat perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa, dressed more conservatively than I'd ever seen her. Beside her stood a woman in her 50s, elegant in a simple navy suit, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Dr. Harlow," the woman said, stepping forward with an extended hand. "I'm Natalia Vasquez." I froze, staring at my former therapist, in complete confusion. "Natalia, you're the buyer?" She smiled, a warm, knowing expression that was familiar from our sessions. "Actually, I'm representing the buyer. My client is very interested in this property, but wanted me to speak with both you and Mr. Harlow before finalizing the offer." Travis cleared his throat. "Ms. Vasquez has a background in both psychology and real estate investment. Her client apparently values her insight into properties with complicated histories." I looked between them, still processing this unexpected development. "I don't understand. Why am I needed for this conversation?" "Because," Natalia said gently, "this house holds significant emotional weight for both of you. My client wants to ensure that purchasing it wouldn't be perpetuating harm." "Your client sounds unusually conscientious for a real estate investor," I observed. "She is," Natalia agreed. "She believes spaces hold energy from their past occupants. Before investing in this property, she wants to understand its full story, and perhaps in some small way, help bring closure." I glanced at Travis, who looked as bewildered as I felt. This mystical approach to real estate was about as far from his pragmatic worldview as possible. That he was tolerating it spoke volumes about his desperation to sell. "What exactly do you need from us?" I asked. Natalia gestured to the seating area. Simply a conversation about the house, about what it meant to you both, and about how you've each come to this moment. As we settled into our chairs, Travis and Pippa on one side, Natalia and I on the other, I couldn't help but feel we were in some kind of strange therapy session rather than a real estate meeting. And perhaps, I realized with growing certainty, that was exactly the point. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Eastland, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of amber and gold. My first academic year as the Morris Endowed Chair of Renaissance Studies had ended, bringing with it a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. The move had been exactly what I needed, a chance to redefine myself not as Travis's ex-wife, or the woman who outsmarted her cheating husband, but simply as Dr. Emma Harlow, respected scholar and teacher. My colleagues knew nothing of the drama I'd left behind in Windermere, and I preferred it that way. I thought back to that strange meeting with Natalia and her mysterious client, who had never actually appeared in person. The conversation had been uncomfortable at first, Travis defensive, Pippa silent, me uncertain, but Natalia had guided us skillfully through what was essentially a mediated closure session, allowing each of us to express our connection to the house and what it represented. Travis had eventually admitted that the house had become a symbol of success for him rather than a home, a trophy to showcase his achievements. I had acknowledged using it as a substitute for the family we couldn't have. Even Pippa had spoken up, confessing she'd been dazzled by the luxury it represented rather than seeing it as a place to build a life. By the end of the session, something had shifted. The tension had eased, replaced by a melancholy recognition of all that had been lost. Not just the marriage or the house, but the dreams they had once contained. The sale had proceeded smoothly after that. Travis and Pippa received enough to pay off the assessment and their other debts, with a modest amount left over. They had separated shortly afterward, Travis taking a position with a firm in Seattle, Pippa returning to her hometown in Oregon. And the mysterious buyer? I never did learn their identity. Natalia would only say that her client was someone who understands the importance of healing spaces. The house remained vacant for months, undergoing extensive renovations. Then, just before I left Windermere, it had reopened as a retreat center for families dealing with infertility and pregnancy loss. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house that had witnessed our inability to create a family was now helping others process similar grief. My phone buzzed with an incoming text, Naomi, sending photos from her weekend visit to the retreat center. "Place looks amazing," she wrote. "So peaceful now. Different energy entirely," I smiled, setting the phone aside. The house had found its purpose, just as I had found mine. People often think the point of surviving betrayal is getting even, making the other person hurt as much as you did. I had certainly started my journey believing that. But somewhere along the way, I'd discovered a more profound truth. The real victory isn't in revenge, but in reconstruction, building something new from the broken pieces. Travis had tried to destroy me with a $1 property transfer, never imagining it would become the catalyst for my liberation. In attempting to leave me with nothing, he had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover who I truly was beyond the confines of our marriage. The sun dipped below the horizon, darkness gradually claiming the sky. I turned away from the view, back toward my apartment filled with books and art and quiet possibility. This was my life now, smaller in some ways than what I'd had before, but infinitely more authentic. And that, I realized, was worth far more than any lakefront house could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.